Mass Effect is a series that a lot of people told me was one of the greatest stories in gaming. Yet, I never played it because I never felt like buying all 3 games, and the games are pretty old, so I'd have to bear with them a little bit. And then, playing these games gave me the idea of sharing my thoughts, as I'm a person who's never played any of the Mass Effect games, and the only thing I knew about the games was the protagonist's name. The first of the 3 games felt like a shot in the dark. The story works alright if it was the only game of the series, and the gameplay progression and combat was fine, but there's a lot of character building that could be built on top of for the future, and a lot to be desired in terms of gameplay if the series were to kick off. The game starts by putting you into an alright character creator where you can design your own version of Commander Shepard, which gives you a little bit of narrative background decision, which I actually really liked. The idea that you could choose your origin gave a lot of, I guess, expectations for it to hold into the future, for it to carry into later conversations of the game, and it did not disappoint me. I chose a Earthborn survivor, and all the way up into the 3rd game, people were still talking about it. It felt very immersive, which leads me into the idea that the decisions you make in this game carry over into the next 2 games, and it feels like everything you're doing matters. You feel as if you are Commander Shepard. It just feels like one giant immersive experience, and it's done very well. Playing on the whole decisions mattering thing is the amazing karma system that it seems like a lot of more modern games are trying to recreate, but aren't doing it as successfully as this game. It introduces you to this Paragon Renegade system, and it gives you the idea that, you know, good decisions are Paragon, and Renegade is all the bad decisions, quote unquote. It makes you further implies that you are Commander Shepard, and it immerses you into the Milky Way galaxy with a very interesting, different variety of alien species and a handful of characters that I wanted to go out of my way to talk to because they seem so interesting. Everything feels right, and everything feels done very, very narratively focused. Speaking of narratively focused, the story of this game does pretty well. I think it's very, like, I guess, traditionally focused story where there's like a big bad guy, and then by the end of the game you kill this big bad guy. That's not extremely interesting, but then it further shows you the true antagonist of the game and the overarching antagonist of the 3 games. And I think having this connective tissue as Saren is very, very good for the trilogy as a whole. But if you were to play this game by itself, it'd feel, I don't know, I guess a little bit lackluster if there were no future games. And I think the reason that this connective tissue is so important, because it shows you that this Reaper huge threat that seems super outlandish and super ridiculous can be pretty close to home. With Saren being a character that is introduced to you, and a character that lots of people you meet throughout the game knew as an equal, I guess you could say. And it makes everything seem a lot more alive, knowing to you that the Reapers aren't just this threat that's super far away. It's affecting people that are around you. With most of the pros out of the way, the game sounds pretty great. But there were a lot of issues when I was playing the first game. The character building was very interesting. There's small but focused, interesting cast of characters that went around with you along the way, but it left more to be desired. If I would have played this game as a standalone, I'd be pretty, I guess, disappointed. These characters that you meet along the way, it just seems like the beginning of their story, and you just want a lot more out of these characters throughout the game. And also, other issues with the game, I understand the game is very old, so I'm not going to talk too much about gameplay and combat and all that stuff, but it's pretty lackluster. The combat kind of sucks. The skill tree, pretty lackluster. The progression system, pretty lackluster. Not to mention the amount of bugs in the game that had to make me load back a couple times. With an autosave system that never went off, it felt extremely annoying. Also, there was very mild exploration by giving me quests to grab these like 10 random items, go and grab these 10 things from these 10 random worlds that I don't really care about. And it just felt like the page system from the old Assassin's Creed games. Speaking about these 10 random worlds, the game does do a pretty good job letting you know like about these random worlds that don't matter in the grand scheme of the game. But I like the little things thrown in there with like the codex in the game, and that you're able to click on planets and learn like, oh, this planet has this much gravity, or this planet has this type of atmosphere, or this is the temperature on this planet. I think that stuff is just adds to the immersion of the story. There were a slew of other systems that felt pretty outdated, as to be expected from a game this old, and after finishing the first game of this trilogy, I just wasn't sold on Mass Effect. After the first game anyways, I left more to be desired. This game just felt like a huge exposition to the Mass Effect trilogy, and that's fine when you're looking at the game as a trilogy, but Mass Effect 1 is a like standalone game. It's alright, but it did a great job setting up a fictional version of our galaxy. And even though I wasn't sold on the franchise or series as a whole, I was ready to play Mass Effect 2, and I was excited to. Out of the trilogy, Mass Effect 2 does the greatest job as a standalone game. It starts the game with a very bombastic prologue into a character creator that allows you to import your character from the previous game, which I think is done amazingly. And I think the concept is very cool itself. Speaking of the prologue, I think this game's prologue is one of the best prologues out of any game I've ever played. Introduces you to the antagonist as a fearful threat by literally killing you and blowing up all of your belongings from the last game to give you a new start in this game right from the start. And I think that's a great job for setting up an antagonist of a video game or a story in general. And with this new creation of Commander Shepard, after you die, this company from the last game comes by and resurrects you, and after resurrecting Shepard, it allows you to reconstruct him differently, and that's the introduction of the character creator, and it's weaved throughout the story perfectly, and it gives a perfect start for people who've never played the previous game, allowing you to have a fresh new start to this universe. Not to mention, are you not with the same, I guess, ship and the same belongings, you're with a whole entirely different company, and there's a different slew of friends and allies throughout the game. In terms of story, this game just feels a lot more impactful than the last game, as expected from a second game of a series, but it feels great. It takes all of the subjects from Mass Effect 1 and adds on and expands them, all while making everything seem even more interesting, even if you didn't play the first game. It feels great. Something else that seemed much improved upon was the actual gameplay elements and combat and immersiveness of your class and character creator from the last game. In the last game, when I chose my class as Infiltrator, I felt like I was locking myself into a bunch of different restrictions. When I chose myself as Infiltrator in this game, not only did it give me the sniper rifle from the first game, but it gave me a slew of abilities that were a lot more indicative to an Infiltrator class in the game. It gave me the ability to like go invisible and snipe people. And not only did I have a sniper, I had a pistol, an SMG, and a heavy weapon, which all felt interesting in its own right. Also, to mention, it got rid of the no ammo system, this overheating weapon system, which felt pretty sluggish. And this whole idea of 4 different weapons, and different weapons are better in certain environments, rather than me just using the sniper on literally every single enemy I saw, found great. And it made me feel unique, and made me feel not restricted to all these, I guess, locks that were on the previous game. Something about this game that I think was worse than the last game was the amount of squad members that were given to me. I had like 12 squad mates or members, and it felt very overwhelming later on in the game when 12 squad members wanted me to help them out and do a loyalty mission with them. Well, I think the loyalty mission system is great, and it introduces you to characters more personally and attaches emotion to the characters. After doing half of the loyalty missions, it felt more like a chore when the character brought up a loyalty mission for them, rather than exciting. Another problem with such a big squad was it made certain characters stick out much more than other characters, and it felt kind of imbalanced from a character writing perspective. I wasn't nearly as interested in talking to Zaid as I was Garrus, and I'm sure other people felt the same way. Sticking with characters, I just want to point out the amount of things carried over from the last game. If you were to have played the last game, it felt immersive and great. There was an Asari from the first game, which is this alien species, and I let run away from me because she promised to change her ways when she was working for the antagonist, just to find her again in another bad position. And it felt really funny and immersive and really cool. Something that little was brought into the game. Another thing brought over for the first game was the galaxy map, which is a whatever system, but narratively makes a lot of sense. But exploration has as a whole, seemed to be improved. Instead of going to a random planet and finding a randomly generated gun you could find anywhere, doing special side quests and charting new worlds gave you weapons and armor exclusive to those quests, and it felt much more rewarding. Something else that felt a lot more rewarding with this game rather than the last game was the ending. Mass Effect 1's ending was very traditional. You follow Big Bad throughout the entire game. You him a couple times and then you kill him. But then the connecting tissue was pretty great. Mass Effect 2's ending, however, was far more compelling to me. After chasing this alien species down who was introduced to you at the very beginning of the game, they're the people who killed you, and you follow along this alien species throughout the game, you find out that these aliens are actually servants of the Reapers, who are the overarching antagonists of the entire game series. And these collectors or aliens that were working for servants of the Reapers further played on to the idea of the Reapers being this huge threat that just controls everyone through indoctrination. And I think it all seemed very, very interesting that this threat from the beginning of the first game is just controlling that. It's kind of a Lovecraftian, the big squid monsters. They're controlling everyone around them. I think it's pretty interesting. Not only does this allow the game to continue to feel like a great standalone game because it introduces you to the Reapers again, but it feels great by itself because instead of this brief explanation from the first game, it expands upon everything from the first game and basically says what the first game said. And it makes these Reapers seem even more threatening and even more interesting. Even at the end of the game, there's this huge twist with you chase down these collectors or alien species and you find out that they're actually killing and abducting humans to then change their DNA into a Reaper themselves, because Reapers are just giant robots. They're in the visage of the people who created them. So they're humans. They were impressed by you as Commander Shepard, so they were gonna make a giant human Reaper, and it felt crazy, and everything came together. And then bringing it back to the ending of the first game with Saren being the connective tissue, it turns out this alien species that could be from the beginning, the collectors, it was the servants of the Reapers, were actually being controlled by the Reapers as you're fighting them. And it led you into the leader of the Reapers, Harbinger. And this Harbinger guy was talking to you throughout the game. And in the visage, or I guess he was controlling the collectors. And it gave you a little bit more insight to how the Reapers work and how they're mind controlling everyone to do their will. And then at the very end of the game, it gives you a bunch of more information about the Reapers and makes them feel like a closer threat to you. After these two connective tissues are gone, the Reapers are shown at the end of the game looking over your galaxy as this immediate threat to you. So the first two games set up this huge antagonist that has been the biggest problem for the past two games to then segue into the third game. And it does it very well, and I think more games should strive to do something like this. Whereas the first game felt like a shot in the dark, everything in Mass Effect 2's story feels carefully placed and done very well, from an amazing prologue and expedition to a bunch of new characters and old to an ending that I definitely was not expecting. Where Mass Effect 2 fails to compel me is the amount of missions from followers felt like a chore, and they made the mission structure felt too repetitive. And I know some of the characters were DLC because the Legendary Edition adds DLC or gives you all the DLC of the 3 games. But it just feels like a lot thrown at you. Speaking of DLC, though, there were some pretty cool DLC missions in Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 1, I didn't really notice if things were set apart as DLC, but Mass Effect 2, there were 2 specific, story arcs that I thought were very interesting. There was Project Overload, And then there was the Shadow Broker stuff, which I think was woven through the story carefully, and it made the DLC felt like part of the base game. And a couple last things to say about Mass Effect 2. The Paragon Renegade system was upgraded in this game with the cutscenes feeling interactive, with the ability to change the cutscenes a little bit by, I guess, like, you can either be an asshole and like do something like an asshole would do, or you could be a nice guy in the cutscene. Because there's a prompt that shows up that allows you to like left click or right click, and I think that's very, very interesting. Also, romances and character progression was further developed in this game. I guess pretty basic systems nowadays, but for a game this old, it seems pretty interesting. With everything in Mass Effect 2's story feeling carefully placed, it just made me extremely excited to play the third game. After playing for the first 2 games, I was sold on the Mass Effect trilogy, and I couldn't wait to start playing Mass Effect 3. If we step back and review everything said, if you look at the entire Mass Effect trilogy, or I guess the first 3 games, or the stuff in Legendary Edition, the first game feels like an exposition that makes me want more. The second game feels like an amazing rising action that keeps me at the edge of my seats. And the third and final game feels like the climax where every single loose end is about to be tied up. Mass Effect 3 throws you right into the Reaper threat established by the past 2 games, and the galaxy feels rather tense. Before I mention, I guess, the story and how the game starts, I do want to point out, I think the art team did a great job with this game. The Reapers, as I established earlier, are this threat that mind control people, and they take over people. And in doing so, it changes the appearance of these people. And every single enemy you face in Mass Effect 3 feels familiar, but crazy, new, and exciting at the same time. Because you're seeing all these old races that you were friends with become these amalgamations of multiple races smushed together, and it looks great. The game kicks off with this crazy exposition that's almost like a climax of the last games itself, with this Reaper threat coming to Earth, which I think is perfect, relaying it a lot closer to us than all of the last games. The Reapers are attacking Earth, and you can see all the different ships and all the different races they take over, and it makes the Reapers feel so much closer to you before, and it's done great. Not only does it feel like the Reapers are dominating you and that you've overstayed their welcome, but that galaxy map that I mentioned earlier on in the other games, the thing you travel around the galaxy with, is now covered with Reapers. So if you go to a certain solar system, if you're there for too long, or like checking out planets or exploring, the Reapers will actually come after you, and it's like a little mini game in itself where you have to run away from the Reapers and they can kill you. I think stuff like that is great for immersion in the game, and it makes this kind of boring galaxy map, kind of annoying when you have to exit out of it, become this interesting system that correlates even better with the story. On the note of the Reapers, literally, I think every single main mission involves the Reapers, and it makes this threat seem even more important to you. And everything seems to be a giant climax, and all of the characters are fearful of this giant threat of the galaxy being overwhelmed by the Reapers. Everyone in the game is that threat, and it gives an excuse to introduce a bunch of fan service, and a bunch of your friends from the past games are back and to help you fight this giant threat. It makes sense, but there's a lot of fan service where I think if I were to play this game by itself, if they cut out the fan service, a lot of the content would be missing, and the ending wouldn't be, I guess, as satisfying. Along with immersion with like the map and the Reapers and all this stuff, when you're just walking around like the main city in the Citadel, or when you're just walking around in your ship, everything feels even more alive than the last games did. So the last games, I don't think, feel extremely alive compared to more recent titles, but this game has these dynamics where you can go up to 2 characters arguing, and you can support one side of the argument. I love this. I think more games should do stuff like this. I'm sure there are more modern games, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. And it makes the world feel interesting and alive. And then all these characters don't have their they all have like a similar agenda to you. They're all scared of the Reapers, and it makes the Reapers seem like even more of a threat from an immersive world building standpoint. It all feels great. And then from a narrative perspective, or like a main story, the all of the characters from the past games and all of the fan service is actually woven through the story pretty well. It makes everything seem like it's meant to be, rather than having these loyalty missions that you have to go all out of your way and it's a chore for. You're introduced to all of these previous characters and some new characters throughout the main story, and they all have a purpose for being there. They don't just seem thrown in. But talking about thrown in, I think, I guess a little issue is, I guess I wish the DLC wasn't given to me so early on, and then that segues into the secondary quest tab. This game needs a secondary quest tab. I think that one of the biggest issues with this game is the fact that you're just overwhelmed with a ridiculous amount of quests handed to you, and then you don't fucking know what is important to do and like what really matters. There's just so much information given to you, and then with the emails, there's so many emails given to you. It makes you lose track of what you're supposed to be doing and makes everything feel a little bit off the rails, and I don't really like that. Disregarding the problem with the side quest tab, which is a pretty huge problem in my opinion, the side quests that I guess I did do seem very important. The idea that at the beginning of the game, they set you up with this final war that's going to happen at the game, the final climax in the game that is just a giant climax. It sets you up with the final war against the Reapers and how you need to stop them. And at the beginning of the game, they give you a progress bar. And each side quest you do gives you a little bit of percentage, or I guess not percentage, it gives you a little bit of progress in this progress bar in terms of war assets. And I think this system is pretty interesting because it made me feel like everything I was doing, from killing like random Cerberus dudes to talking to random people on Citadel, seem important because I have a chance of people joining up against this huge threat of the Reapers. And it further I guess deepened the immersion into the idea that the world is at stake and everyone wants to end the Reapers. Everything from the previous two games felt led up to this final war, and it felt immersive and exciting, building up a galactic army to fend off the Reapers. The biggest contention point I had after beating this game, though, was the ending. I think the ending of this game was honestly, I guess, possibly the worst part about this game. I played through the game, I got to the ending, and not only were there multiple points like on the final mission where it felt like a great ending point, it just kept going on and on and on. And then this whole final sequence thing didn't make much sense. There's the boy that you're following from the beginning, and everything just feels like a bunch of smoke and mirrors with not enough foreshadowing telling you what's actually going on. I don't know what's actually going on, but the ending felt a little bit lackluster and not extremely satisfying. And I went with the ending where you seize control of the Reapers or whatever, and it just felt kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this. But the idea that Commander Shepard is the shepherd of the galaxy, very nice touch. And then one other thing about the final mission that I thought was really cool is the symbolism calling back to the first game. When you're going from Ilium to Citadel, and you rush towards the portal, and then it brings you to the Citadel. That's kind of what the final thing is. You're running to this portal that brings you to the Citadel. I think that the callback is great, and I like stuff like that. But the actual ending, I don't know if I don't think it's satisfying. I don't think it's great. I think the greatest thing to take away from this trilogy is to review all three games as a trilogy. I think all of the games complement each other in a great way. Everything that was missing from the first game was made up for in the second game. And when I won more after Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3 filled that void. Everything is very harmonious and put together, and I would recommend Mass Effect in this trilogy, or Mass Effect Legendary Edition, to many people. Although I do think, I guess, the ending of the trilogy could be worked on. I don't know. I know Mass Effect 4 is supposed to be coming out, and I don't really know what they're going to do with that. I'm kind of excited to see. I just think the biggest issues with this trilogy as a whole, I wish I had more time to talk, but I don't want to make this video super long. I only gave you like a quarter of information from each game, like, brief rundown. The biggest issues overall with Mass Effect Legendary Edition are the the nature of it being an outdated game, the secondary quest tab, the squad size, and then just the lack of stuff in Mass Effect 1, the bugs. And then, the ending wasn't the greatest. But the narrative and the complete picture and the complete story is done great. And I really, really like it. And I wish I would have played this series a little bit earlier. But I guess waiting worked out pretty well too. This Mass Effect Legendary Edition came out. And I would recommend it to people. And I can see how it's a pioneer for modern day story or RPG kind of games. Mass Effect Legendary Edition. It was fun.
You were born to do this.